Attention! This makes absolutely no sense. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Zander's Facts.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Zander's Facts podcast. I am, of course, the aforementioned Zander. We are on episode 64 of the podcast here on Wednesday, May 25th, 2022. Thank you all for listening to the Zander's Facts podcast. And remember, if you like all the facts, if you think you're going to like all the facts on this episode of the podcast, then remember to click the follow button on this podcast, download this episode, rate the podcast, review the podcast, go on all your socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Zander's Facts, that's Zander with a Z, including Zander's putting some TikToks out there. Spread the facts, of course, to all your friends. Zander's Facts podcast. We've kind of got a little chill podcast for episode 64 this week. We're talking soccer.
Oh, yay.
And some of you might say, oh my gosh, I hate soccer. Why are you talking about soccer? But you shouldn't. Because this past weekend, the soccer that was going on was pretty awesome. And if you missed it, I feel sorry for you and all your whining about how soccer's terrible and it's boring. No, maybe you should watch. Because what happened Sunday in the Premier League was pretty awesome. So, what I did this week for a little bit of the podcast was we brought in our soccer guru for Zander's Facts, Emma Adams. She is on the podcast this week. We talked about the Premier League. We talked about the title race, the relegation race, because I need to have a new favorite team in the Premier League. If you didn't know, we also talked about the Champions League, because the Champions League final is this Saturday. Oh my gosh. And a little preview for the World Cup. The World Cup, we're in a World Cup year, but the World Cup is not taking place this summer. It's taking place in November and December. I've talked about that on this podcast. It's all terrible because it's in Qatar. But it's still happening. And the U.S. are going to play in it. So, I mean, we kind of have to watch. But we're going to talk about all that in just a minute. But before we get to that, I did want to talk about something serious on the podcast for just a second. Because right before we recorded this podcast, Tuesday, May 24th, by now you probably know that there was a school shooting in Texas and an elementary school. 15 people are dead. 14 elementary schoolers dead because of a school shooter who had a gun. And of course, it's not just the US news that's covering this, it's worldwide news. Because you know why? This doesn't happen anywhere else except for the United States of America. And I don't really want to get into this because I talked about this a little bit. I've talked about gun control a ton on this podcast. You go back and find that episode. But I've talked about, 2 weeks ago, we talked about abortions. And we were like, how could you be pro-life if you don't support abortions, so you're pro-life. But how are you pro-life if you support guns and don't support gun control? When you see what happens, Texas has the loosest gun laws in the country. Don't mess with my freedoms, Texas. And you see what happens. Now 14 elementary school kids are dead. Every day, we have incidents on school grounds in this country with guns. And every once in a while, we get this huge mass shooting now, where children are dying innocently because, it's Second Amendment right, I need my gun to good people with guns. Well, the good people with guns didn't help in this case because 14 people already died. 15 people, 14 elementary schoolers, and a teacher. So now we're dealing with this, and we of course deal with this every single time this happens, and all the politicians, the Republicans say, oh, thoughts and prayers. Of course, you know, it's all BS, and they don't give a crap, because if they did, they'd do something about it. But nothing's been done. Why is that? Because we've talked about this on this podcast, so you know. NRA, oh my gosh, Second Amendment, I need all my guns. But no other civilized country in the world has that. No other civilized country in the world is dealing with school shootings. The BBC, what do you think the BBC is covering right now? They're covering the school shooting in the United States of America. The British Broadcasting Company. Why? Because that never happens in Britain. It only happens in the United States of America. And you talk about mental illness. Every country has mental illness issues. Only one country, only one developed country allows everyone to get a gun, to easily have a gun. Because there are a lot more guns than people in this country. Which makes absolutely no sense. And you really can't tell me otherwise, because you keep saying, well, I'm a good gun owner and I don't do anything bad with it. Well, that'd be great, but can't trust people with any guns, because guns can get into the wrong hands anywhere. Guns are only used for shooting, firing, killing. I don't understand. We talked about this on this podcast. I didn't really want to get into it, but I just had to mention because, we're going to go through the cycle again of another big event, and everybody says thoughts and prayers, and some people say, oh my gosh, we got to do something. But nothing's going to happen. I mean, seriously, it happened in Texas, where the wheelchair governor is saying, getting rid of abortions, getting rid of rape exceptions for abortions, and then saying, well, rape's a crime, we're going to prosecute rape. Well, were you not doing that before? And just letting everybody have a gun. Because apparently, freedoms apparently triumph life in Texas, apparently. Because apparently, they're prioritizing gun freedoms over lives. Children's lives. But can't have any abortions, because that's a life. But I don't care about the lives of the students in the schools, because that's what it's looking like for me. I don't know. That's just what I wanted to mention here on the Zander's Facts podcast, because a bunch of you are probably thinking I was going to say something, and I did. But of course, we've talked about guns, gun control numerous times. Talked about it 2 weeks on the abortion episode. If you haven't listened to that, you need to go listen to that. And gun control. We had a whole episode dedicated to gun control last year, so go check that out. But again, I digress, because it's going to keep happening, because United States of America. Woo! Freedoms.
Thanks goodness that's over.
So, just want to talk about that. The rest of the podcast, though, is not going to be as serious. It's going to be a little laid back, chill, as I said, because we're talking soccer on the podcast with our soccer guru for Zander's Facts, Emma Adams. She's joining the podcast, and just little disclaimer here. She's very sad because, Liverpool did not do so well in the league. Well, they did, but they didn't. We'll talk about it on the podcast, but she is not happy. So, we had a little bit of Emma Adams on the podcast. We talked Champions League, Premier League, preview of the World Cup. We talked about all of that. So, here we go. We are talking soccer as the Zander's Facts podcast continues.
Zander's Facts.
Alright, Zander's Facts podcast. Oh my gosh. I am super excited for what we are talking about this week. We are talking soccer with our Zander's Facts soccer analyst, guru, whatever, Emma Adams. Emma, how are you?
I'm good, Zander. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. First question for you. How does it feel to be a fan of a club that lost the league in 5 minutes in the final day of the season? It must feel horrible.
I will tell you proud, because we were 14 points behind them, I believe, and came back and made it a final day game.
All right, well.
Proud. And we did everything we could in our power. We won that game. Sadly, Steven Gerrard didn't play for us that day. Yeah. So he played for Man City.
Please.
Maybe shouldn't have drawn earlier season. But if you don't know what we're talking about the Premier League. The final match day of the season was on Sunday. And if you missed it, then I feel sorry for you. Because it was awesome. That was probably, this is the first year that I've really been into soccer in the Premier League, and it was pretty amazing. Sunday morning is when it happened. We were talking about the title race because Man City and Liverpool were in the title race. Those two were separated by 1 point. Man City just had to win. They were playing Aston Villa. They were down 2-0 because I don't know why.
Well, continue.
Yeah, but then in the, whatever it was, the 80th minute, they score
80-something.
3 goals in 5 minutes. And Emma Adams is very sad about that because well, first off, they scored the first goal. I was like, okay, this might happen. They scored the second goal. They scored the third goal. And Liverpool needed to at least win if Man City drew, and they could draw if Man City lost, but Man City won. Liverpool beat Wolves.
As well.
Yeah, we
won.
against Wolves, which they were down in that game. 0-1, Liverpool.
They were, but so were Manchester City, 2-0.
Oh, 2-0. And that was 10 years later from 2012. Man City were down 2-1 to QPR, Queen Park Rangers, who aren't even in the Premier League anymore. They were down 2-1, 2 goals in extra time, including the last one, you all know. Aguero! And they beat Man United that day to win their first Premier League, and now they have won 5 of the last 6 Premier League titles.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Cool facts, bro.
Yeah, well, better than you-know-who, so.
But do we want to have the debate where it's basically boring to watch them because they're just made of money? Because if you look at the facts, what Jurgen Klopp has done with not even half of Pep's budget is insane. Pep is playing FIFA. He's buying everyone. And at that point, it's not even fun. It's not even soccer. It's just money.
It is fun. Actually, it's not fun. I'm not a Man City fan.
Exactly.
But over Liverpool, sick of Liverpool.
50-50.
But they did win. I was actually watching that, what was it? The Queen Park Rangers game 10 years ago. Martin Tyler was calling that game.
Yum!
And he said that could be the beginning of a dynasty, and it certainly was, because they have won 6 of the last 10 Premier League titles.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
How about that? So Man City won the Premier League for the 2nd straight year, because the 2020 season was basically a fluke. So then, at the bottom was where all the good stuff happened, because
yeah, that was fun.
The relegation race. So the bottom 3 teams in the Premier League get relegated to the Championship, which, who knows why the 2nd division is called the Championship. That doesn't make any sense. So Watford and Norwich were already relegated. So 2 teams were fighting for the last spot in the Premier League next season. Those were Burnley and Leeds. And Leeds, my new favorite team, have manager whose name is Jesse Marsh, who comes from Racine, Wisconsin.
United States.
He is an American. And all they needed was a result against Brentford, the Bees, who they were playing, and they needed Burnley to fall to Newcastle. And both happened because Burnley lost to Newcastle. Leeds, so they only needed a draw, and they were tied, but then they got another 94th minute goal from MLS product, Jack Harrison.
America.
How about that? American stuff, sealing the deal. So Jesse March
How about that?
Jesse March gets the highest finish ever in the Premier League for an American manager. There's only ever been 2 Premier League managers who are U.S.
One didn't
American.
stay up, I'm guessing.
American. Yeah, Bob Bradley with Swansea, which is sad. But Jesse March is staying up, and he's going to stay for next season, which is pretty crazy because they were not doing... Actually, they've been ravaged by injuries. They did not look pretty good. They had to fire their manager, Bielsa, who's been there for a while, at the middle of the season, and they had to hire Marsh, and it did not look good. But they defied the odds. How about that? Ted Lasso himself, in the flesh.
How about that?
And get ready for this, because they've got some money to spend now, because they're staying in the Premier League. So they are going to get Brennan Aronson, our guy, the 21-year-old from Salzburg, $28 million deal.
Yay!
Brilliant.
I mean, they've got a full off season now for their team to recover from injuries. They can get acclimated to the system that Jesse March wants to do. Oh my gosh. Hey, can we make some picks for next season? I think that Chelsea's going to finish number 1 in the Premier League, and Leeds are going to be number 2. Actually, it could be either or, you could say. I don't know.
Okay, well, I don't know about that one. I would say United's still not going to be good.
Oh my gosh.
They're so bad. I would also...
But they have Penaldo.
They do a Penaldo. The penultimate. I would say Arsenal's going to be 7th, as always. They normally are like, meh. It's normally between City, Liverpool, Tottenham, and Chelsea.
And Leeds as well. Yes, Leeds.
I could see Leeds finishing 7th.
Wow, that's a conference Wow, the
It's a
Conference League.
it's conference spot.
That'd be awesome. They will. Actually, I think they'll go to the Champions League, but
We remain hopeful.
What are you talking about?
Well, who's going to win it next year? Because I already said it's going to be Chelsea or Leeds, so.
I mean, I'd love to say Liverpool. I think they're going to be hungry because of this title. And they're always in the running, so my bet's on them.
No, okay. Well, they're not getting you-know-who. We're going to talk about in the transfer window in a little bit. But also, the other teams, actually, Burnley, I want to talk about Burnley for a second because they may be in some trouble. They of course, got relegated, which is, not good.
Yeah, that's major trouble.
But they had their ownership group now has to pay a bunch of the debt now that club has. So we might not see them in the Premier League for a while.
We might not see that. Yeah. No.
It might be a little rough. But the other teams that were fighting for spots on Sunday were Tottenham, who got the 4th spot for the Champions League. Arsenal was 5th. I don't know what you're talking about, 7th. And Man United.
They normally are consistently 7th.
Okay, well, they finished 5th this year, Europa League. And then Man United, who were 2nd last year, are 6th. So they're going to Europa, and then West Ham was 7th, and they got that Conference League spot.
West Ham. They're up and coming.
Well, not as good as Chelsea. So the 3 teams that were relegated were Burnley, Watford, and Norwich. Norwich have our guy, Josh Sargent, from the U.S., And then the 3 teams, actually, we only know 2 teams that have been promoted right now because we've got another game to talk about. Fulham, who have Tim Ream and Anthony Robinson for the U.S. Jedi Robinson! That's my team. And Bournemouth. Those 2 teams finished at the top of the championship, so they were promoted. But we've got the playoff between Nottingham Forest and Huddersfield Town. And Nottingham Forest has my guy, Ethan Horvath, from the Nations League CONCACAF last year, saving that penalty against Mexico, won him the Nations League, forever American hero.
True.
But that game is Sunday, and the winner, what do they call it? The most expensive game in soccer or whatever, sports.
Oh.
Yeah, it's soccer. Because if you go to the Premier League, you get a lot of money, and if you stay in championship, you don't.
You don't get it much.
So, who's going to win, M. Adams? The Tricky Trees or Huddersfield? There is a correct
Were Huddersfield
answer.
in it last year?
I don't know.
I'm kind of feeling Huddersfield.
Brentford beat Swansea, so no. The Bees are still in it. How about that? But you think they're going to win, Huddersfield? Seriously?
I would say Huddersfield.
Well, when Nottingham wins 3-1, and actually Ethan Horvath's not even going to play because they got a better goalie, so, But actually, that's the problem because the U.S., we're going to talk about the World Cup in a little bit, but the U.S., they're going to have, if Nottingham wins, they're going to have their top 3 goalkeepers in the Premier League, but they're all going to be backups because Zach Steffen is the backup to Ederson at Man City. Matt Turner is going from New England to Arsenal in the summer, and he's going to be a backup. And now Ethan Horvath, but it's not good. But that's what we got for the Premier League, which was awesome. You need to watch the Premier League. It's over now, so you can't. But the big game, the big solo game, takes place this Saturday, the finale of the Champions League. And Emma's very excited about that.
The game. It's the game of the season.
Well, that was the
Champions League final.
Real Madrid and Liverpool, the Deads. A rematch of the 2018 final, which Real Madrid won 3-1.
Because they injured Salah.
Yeah, he was angry about that. And then Liverpool won the next year, but they beat the crappy team Spurs. So, the reigning champions, of course, are, Chelsea, champions of the world, because they won it, and then they went to the Club World Cup, and, Pulisic, I love him.
If you say so.
But to get here, we all remember a couple weeks ago in the semifinals, Real Madrid and Man City. Real Madrid scored 2 crazy goals at the end of the second leg semifinal to tie it, and then they got a penalty in extra time to win. They beat Man City. Pep was very sad. Pep has not won the Champions League with Man City. He needs to before he leaves because he's leaving to go to the U.S. We'll talk about that. And then Liverpool kind of struggled a little early in their semifinal against the Europa League champs from last year, Villarreal. But then they did their thing and, So, it's Real Madrid and Liverpool. What are you watching in this matchup between a really good Spanish team and a not a really good English team, Adams?
Well, I think you're watching, I think it's a game of offense, really. It's whoever's going to finish more. You're definitely going to be watching the midfield. Whoever can win the ball in the middle 50 would be big. I think that's the most important. I think we're seeing who gets the ball first and who's finishing, and that's going to decide the title.
Pretty sure Benzema's pretty good at finishing. So, Real Madrid have won the most Champions League titles by far. 13 they have.
But Liverpool have won the most Champions League of an English team.
Good to know.
Okay, well, when you count the 60s, sure, but Liverpool are seeking their 7th title. Real Madrid are looking for their 14th, and if Liverpool got their 7th title, it would tie them with AC Milan for 2nd all-time, which they probably won't. And Real's manager, Carlo Ancelotti, who won La Liga this season, Real Madrid did, he won the Champions League in his first stint with Madrid in 2014, and then he won it twice with Milan, actually, in 2003-2007. So he's pretty good. Better than Jurgen, who's only won it once with Liverpool in 2019. But here's the thing. If the Reds had won the Premier League, a win in the Champions League would have given them the quadruple. Because they also won the EFL and FA Cups, which actually I will say probably shouldn't fully count because they won it on penalties, both of them, to Chelsea.
Oh God!
Who
I think if we get 3 out of 4, that's pretty good, and we're the only English team that even compete for a quadruple in history.
Do better.
But also Chelsea, in both of their penalties, did not do Christian Pulisic, or he might have actually gone in the first one. The second one, though, he got subbed off. Their best player. So, yeah. But no English team has ever won the quadruple, and Liverpool has not. They never will. Ever. So, Real Madrid finished top this season. So, and both Real Madrid and Liverpool have no U.S. players, so I don't care about this game. But we got to make some predictions, because the final is this Saturday, 3 o'clock Eastern, CBS, Paramount Plus, and Univision to watch in Spanish. M. Adams, who's going to win this game?
It's going to go into penalties, 2-2 penalties. And, I mean, I would love Liverpool to win, but I feel like Real Madrid might have the better penalty takers.
Yes, they do.
So I'm going to say undecided.
Undecided?
Disgusting!
But my result is that it will be 2-2 and go to penalties.
All right, well, Real Madrid's going to win 4-0, and I'll tell you why, because they are the better team. Liverpool are going to be very sad. Jurgen's going to be very sad. Mohamed, Trent, he's not even very good. He's not even good, actually.
And it's good.
And they're going to lose. Because Benzema, Modric is like 35 years old, but he's still rolling. They've got Ancelotti as their manager. They've got Vinicius Jr., actually, frequent guest on this podcast, Goose, that's his favorite team, Vinicius Jr. So, Real Madrid are going to win this game. So that's what we've got for the Champions League, because that final is Saturday. But before we let Em Adams go, because she's very sad. She's very sad that Liverpool did not win the Premier League, so she's actually crying on the screen right now. But
yes, I am.
It's actually, we're entering a very quiet soccer summer in a World Cup here, because the World Cup is in Qatar, which takes place November and December, and the draw was held a couple months ago to determine which countries are placed in which groups. So we've got the 8 groups, and Group B is obviously the best group because it has the best team. It actually has the best team and the worst team in the tournament, if you didn't know.
England and the United States.
The US, who are the best team, have the best players, and England, who are, of course, L, but the greatest nation on earth, and it also features the country that lost the Revolutionary War.
That's a fact!
And we've also got Iran and the playoff winner of Wales, Scotland, and Ukraine. And because that's a playoff, Scotland, Wales, and Ukraine are going to play to determine who goes to the World Cup. So they're actually playing next Wednesday. Scotland and Ukraine are going to play, and then Sunday, June 5th, Wales is going to play the winner of that game. Both of those games on ESPN2. So we got to make our picks here. M. Adams, who is going to the World Cup out of those 3 teams?
Wales.
Yeah, probably. Gareth Bale. It'd be pretty cool if it was Ukraine, though.
I think they'll have a lot of spirit. Zinchenko just won the Premier League, and he was happy about that. That was a wholesome moment.
So, we got those. The other playoffs, we have Group... So the other playoffs, we have Group D. Group D has France, Denmark, Tunisia, and a playoff between Australia and the United Arab Emirates, who then are going to face off against Peru. First match is June 7th. Peru match is June 13th, both those in Qatar. And then Group E has Spain, Germany, and Japan. It's kind of like the group of... Yeah, that'll be big group. Kind of. Yeah, I was going to say group of death. And then Group E has the playoff winner between Costa Rica and New Zealand. And those matches... That's on June 14th. Those matches are going to take place at 2 o'clock Eastern. So, out of the groups, the other groups are Group A. We've got Qatar, Ecuador, Senegal, Netherlands. Group C is Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Linktree, Poland. Group F is Belgium, Canada, Morocco, Croatia. Group G is Brazil, Serbia, Switzerland, Cameroon. And Group H is Portugal, Ghana, Uruguay, and South Korea. So... we just gotta make some early predictions because we're gonna come back to this later on. But early predictions for the World Cup, Emma Adams, what are you thinking? Especially out of Group B.
Out of Group B, it's England and Wales.
Wales hasn't even qualified for the playoff, and you have them getting out of the group stage?
Yeah. Because America always fails.
That's not a fact.
What? Not in 1776.
They did in 2016 to 20.
Well, that was different group of players, different manager, GGG. You know how many trophies does Gareth Southgate have?
1 million.
He has 0. He has won 0. He's been the manager with England since 2016. He's won 0. You know how many trophies Greg Berhalter has?
How many?
2. He won the Nations League, CONCACAF Nations League, and the CONCACAF Gold Cup, where he had to play Qatar and Mexico in the final both times. So, and he's only been manager since 2018, so I would think if England were actually good, they'd actually win something. They should have, they had a chance. They should have won the Euros.
They should have won the Euros, yeah.
But they failed. So
yeah.
They did their losers. So we've got all that, and then the summer, I'm going to break down all the summer stuff for the U.S. that we've got coming up in a second. But that's World Cup, all that stuff. But we're going to talk about the World Cup later on this podcast because it's not happening this summer. It's happening in the fall. And M. Adams is going to be our big soccer World Cup guru. And of course, I'm going to put some stuff on Zander's.
I'll be less sad.
Well, you will be because England's going to lose. But I'm also going to put stuff on Zander's Facts social media channels. So we got all that stuff. But before we go, summer transfer window. We've got that. Just break that down for a second because we've got Kylian Mbappe, who's staying at PSG. He's not going to Real, and now they're suing, I think, which they're just petty lawsuit.
True, petty law.
Wimps!
Of course, Man City's going to probably run away with the Premier League next year because they're getting Erling Haaland from Dortmund, which is...
all they have is money.
Yeah, and Lewandowski is leaving Bayern, who is... I think he wants to go to Barcelona, but I think he's going to go to Chelsea. And Serginho Dest, who's with Barcelona, is going to go to Chelsea, too. Well, we don't know that yet, but it's been rumored. And Brendan Aaronson's going to Leeds. And Tyler Adams, who's with Leipzig, could go to Leeds, too. We'll see. Pulisic, the big thing right now is Christian Pulisic, who plays for Chelsea, took Chelsea out of his Instagram bio. But you know what? He's still got all these pictures of him in Chelsea stuff.
When does his contract end?
2024.
Okay.
I don't think anything's gonna. I think he'll stay because they also just got an American owner, a new one. I don't think that an American owner who wants to grow the team in America because they're literally taking a U.S. tour this summer.
Yeah.
But if he does leave, he's gonna go to Leeds. Man, what a team! Oh my gosh, they could destroy Man City. So who are Liverpool gonna get? Nobody?
They normally don't spend big. We just bought one person coming in July 1st, I think. Fabio Carvalho from Fulham. He is 19 years old.
No, probably not good.
He's a forward, so that'll be good.
Well, I've heard rumors that Salah might leave because he hasn't signed a new contract, so.
He's not going to leave this year. Maybe next, but not yet. He wants to stay. I think it's like the Terry McLaurin deal. It's just about money. So we're going to have to see.
We'll see what Jurgen does. I mean, what has Jurgen ever won? I mean, seriously, please.
A lot of things.
Doubt it, Jurgen.
We've got 2 trophies this season.
Well, how about 0?
How about you?
How about they don't count fully because they only won them in penalties?
I don't think that's how it works.
When Thomas Tuchel made a stupid decision to take Pulisic off the field. Pulisic, who does only bury penalties. Like, seriously.
Seriously?
He wins, but I don't know if you watched that CONCACAF Nations League final last year where he buried that penalty. So, to win them the game. Yeah, so there you go. But that's what we've got right now for soccer. I got some other stuff coming up in a second here on the podcast. But that's all we got for Em Adams because she's very sad. She wants to go cry in her room that Liverpool lost. But we'll see. But hey, if they win the Champions League, we might get some exclusive Zander's Facts content on our socials.
Yes, but they're regardless having the parade because of the FA Cup and EFL, so I'll be there.
Well, kind of stupid. All right, you didn't even pick Liverpool to win. Gosh.
I said maybe. I gotta be real sometimes.
All right. Well, yeah, because Real Madrid are gonna win. All right, that's our Zander's Facts soccer guru, Em Adams, who's now going to go lay on her bed and cry. Em Adams, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Zander's Facts.
Thanks once again to our Zander's Facts soccer guru, Em Adams, for coming on the podcast. Listen, she's very sad because Liverpool are not going to win the quadruple and didn't win the Premier League. But they still have the Champions League. But we'll see because Real Madrid have been playing really well. So the Champions League final is this Saturday at 3 o'clock Eastern, which you gotta watch because it's basically the last chance to watch club soccer until the season starts in August because the season is basically over. But the international game is still going on. Now, the World Cup is not until the end of the year, November, December. It's terrible. But that doesn't mean that the US are not going to be playing this summer.
Tell me!
Because both the men and the women are going to be playing some matches in the next 2 months. The men have 4 matches next month, which begin with a friendly against Morocco in Cincinnati. That game is Wednesday, June 1st at 7:30 Eastern on ESPN2. Morocco's going to the World Cup. Then they'll face Uruguay, who is also going to the World Cup on Sunday, June 5th in Kansas City. That game is 5 o'clock Eastern on Fox. So those are friendlies. So those are good experiences for the players to play with their team, the international team, which they don't get to play with as much as their club, but they don't mean really anything. But then, 2 games that do mean something, the group stage of the CONCACAF Nations League, where the US, of course, are defending champions because they did win last year against Mexico, as I mentioned. You might have heard Pulisic, the penalty, Ethan Horvath saving the penalty, and we talked about it on this podcast. But in the CONCACAF Nations League group stage, they will face Grenada on Friday, June 10th in Austin, Texas at 10 o'clock Eastern on ESPN+, and then they will hit the road to San Salvador in El Salvador on Tuesday, June 14th at 10 o'clock with that game on FS1. So, we aren't going to be without soccer this summer, even though it's not going to be as good as the World Cup. But the US is still going to be playing. And the other teams are going to be playing, England, they're not even good.
Spitting the truth.
But the women are also playing. And actually, the women have a big tournament in Europe. The Women's Euros are kicking off July 6th until July 31st in England. Defending champion is Netherlands. Netherlands were, of course, the runner-up in the 2019 World Cup because they lost to the US. And I guess that Europe is kind of scared of the US because they didn't invite them, even though it's the Euros. But they still should invite the US because the US are the best team. And it's happening in England. And England's not going to win because England's not any good because they never won anything in women's soccer. So, the U.S. are better. But the women in the U.S. are also going to play. They have got their own tournament this year in July, the CONCACAF W Championship. But before that, in June, they've got 2 friendlies against Colombia. So those don't really mean anything. They're playing Colombia twice here in the States. And then they've got the CONCACAF W Championship. They've got group stages against Haiti, Jamaica, and Mexico. And so the W Championship has been played 10 times, once every 4 years, and the U.S. has won 8 of those, because the U.S. is, of course, amazing. Canada have actually won the other 2. The World Cup was in Canada in 2015, and the W Championship also serves as a qualifying tournament for the Women's World Cup and the Olympics, so it's very important. And by the way, the Women's World Cup takes place next year in Australia and New Zealand, and the U.S. are going to come in for the second straight time defending World Cup champions, looking to add to their record 4 titles, looking for a 5th because, and also, we didn't even talk about this yet, but the U.S. women are now going to be receiving equal pay with the U.S. men, which, rightfully deserve because take a look at the results. But that's going to change. The men are going to win stuff, like the CONCACAF Nations League and Gold Cup. But also, that's pretty awesome that we're going to have equal pay for the men's and the women's national teams here in the U.S.
Congratulations!
Which really no other soccer federation or country does. So, there you go. But that's what we've got this summer in soccer. Of course, the World Cup. Of course, we're going to talk about the World Cup later on this year on this podcast. We just did a little preview. U.S., England, because that's a big game. They're in the same group, so they're going to play in the group stage on Black Friday at 2 o'clock. Everybody's going to be watching that game. You should be watching that game. It's going to be a good one because they're going to beat England. But of course, Black Friday and November, December, because of course it's happening in Qatar, all that junk is terrible. But here's the thing. The U.S. will most likely be bringing in the youngest group to the World Cup because out of the teams that qualified, they were the youngest team to qualify for the World Cup. Their average age was 23.7, which was almost 2 years younger than the second youngest team, Ecuador, who was 25.3. England is 25.6. That is why I will say this. You probably should not expect too much from our great Americans this fall. I know, I hate saying it because they're so great. They've got the best players. We know this. However, I will all remind you that in 4 years, almost exactly 4 years from now, coming to the United States, Mexico, and Canada is the World Cup 2026. And when that happens, the best players that the U.S. has, Serginho Dest, Weston McKennie, Brendan Aronson, who is going to Leeds. I love Leeds now. Leeds are my favorite team now. Maybe Chelsea. Oh, we'll see.
Who?
But all those guys, not to mention Christian Pulisic, the U.S. are going to be in their prime in 2026. If England thinks they're good now, just wait until they play the U.S. 2026 if that happened, because they would get crushed. On home soil, they would probably lose 10-0. Gareth be crying if they haven't fired him yet, because he's not even won any trophies. But we'll talk about that. And of course, we've got the MLS, which are happening. And I don't even have any MLS update with my soccer this week, because I'm angry. Because DC United, who are not very good, I'm mad because they fired their manager an eighth of the way through the season. They fire Hernan Losada, their manager. It doesn't make any sense. But before we go, I got some other soccer notes and news. AC Milan, who we talked about because they've got 7 Champions League trophies, they took home the Serie A trophy for the first time since 2011, and they overcame a challenge from Inter Milan on the final day of the season, and Inter won the league last year for the first time since 2010, which broke Juventus' streak of winning the league 9 straight years. And Inter won this year's Coppa Italia, the Italian Cup, defeating Juventus. Juventus, of course, have our boy Weston McKennie from the U.S., might be leaving, though. I don't know. We'll see. But he was injured, so he wasn't playing in that game, so it doesn't really count. But Bayern Munich in Germany won the Bundesliga for the record 10th consecutive season. A lot of that because, they've got Lewandowski, who is reportedly trying to leave. However, the DFB Pokal, the German Cup, was won by RB Leipzig, who have Tyler Adams, our guy, in the U.S. Now, Tyler Adams might be leaving too. He's been connected with Leeds. Leeds have got some money. They got an American manager. They've got American ownership. Their majority owners are the owners of the 49ers in the NFL.
Too many facts.
Very interesting. And we didn't get to make any Europa League picks this year. We did that last year, but we didn't get to make any this year because the final was last week. And Eintracht Frankfurt, who have Timothy Chandler with the U.S., they defeated Rangers in penalties to win their second Europa League title, their first since 1980. How about that? Lots of stuff going on in soccer that took up all this time on the podcast. But before we go, we're going to get some expert NBA analysis next week because on episode 65 of this podcast, our Zander's Facts NBA analyst Hillbilly is going to be joining the podcast to break down the NBA Finals, all the stuff about it. We're going to recap the NBA playoffs. We're going to preview the NBA Finals, talk about everything there is to know about NBA, basketball, all that stuff. That's coming up next week on the podcast. You are going to want to check that out. So that is what we've got this week on the Zander's Facts podcast. Kind of chill, laid back, just talking about soccer, Zander's Facts podcast. But thank you all for listening. And remember, if you liked all the facts that we had on the podcast, remember to follow this podcast, download this episode, rate the podcast, review the podcast, go on all your socials, go on YouTube. We've got Zander's Facts on YouTube. All our new episodes with a nice background. Check that out. Spread the facts. Tell all your friends. Check out the Linktree. It is linked in this episode's description. It's got all the Zander's Facts links you need. The YouTube, Zander's Weekend Facts, Zander's Weekend Facts. Check that out because we are dropping new newsletters every Sunday morning, and you're going to learn some facts because there's even more facts in there, backing up sources, all that stuff. Zander's Weekend Facts. Check that out, and you can sign up to get it in your email inbox every Sunday morning on the link, on this episode's description, and on the Linktree. Check all that out. Zander's Facts, Zander's Weekend Facts. How about that? But that is it. That is a wrap on episode 64 of the Zander's Facts podcast. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see y'all with episode 65 next week.